All right, we'll try that again. Good afternoon. It is my honor to join you from Washington, D.C. in the United States. I am Dr. Don Trahan Jr., and I'm very happy to be with you to talk about something that is very dear to my heart. So by show of hands, how many of you work for what would be defined as a global company? Show of hands, a global company. Let me share something with you. Overwhelmingly, when people are using the title global, they are getting it incorrect. They're getting it incorrect. And in fact, what they're doing is focusing primarily on where the location of the headquarters of that organization happens to be. And wherever that headquarters is, that then becomes the priority of the organization at large. And so I found myself saying, how do you talk about a global environment where you're meeting the needs of team members that are all over the world when you're focusing primarily on where the headquarters of that organization may be? So what I will spend my time doing with you as quickly as I can is talking about the employee experience in a global environment. Overwhelmingly, what I found in my research, I have the honor of working with organizations domestically and internationally to identify, address, resolve, and repeat matters so that they can reach their bottom line. Another thing that I found, though, in my research is that many organizations are disconnected with their bottom line. What I mean by that is that they're not actually meeting the needs of what they are intended to do. So, by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with a strategic plan? Show of hands, strategic plan. Overwhelmingly, organizations have strategic plans, and depending on the organization, you may have one that is 3 years, 5 years, but the objective is that the strategic plan should be, in the optimal word, guide what you're trying to accomplish over the course of the time. That's not happening, though. In fact, what we found is that many organizations have all of this data, and they don't know what to do with that data. And overwhelmingly, no matter what line of business you're in, what industry, you can't do what you do without the people. So we must pay attention to what the employees are sharing. So here's what I'm going to do with you. We will be successful if, at the end of my time with you, you can understand how to use enterprise data. Does not matter what industry you're in, enterprise data to drive change. And then we want to make sure that once we have that, we can begin the conversation with intentionality to drive change. In my work, I've developed a priority-based implementation model. Part of the reason for that is that overwhelmingly organizations fail when you try to do too many things at one time. Instead, we must prioritize what we're doing and rolling that out. And then you have to measure to assess, is that working? My recommendation is to do the following: month over month, quarter over quarter, and year over year to identify, address, and resolve matters that pertain to your bottom line as a business, paying very close attention to the voice of the team members and or your employees. So here are some things that I'm going to recommend. So by show of hands, how many of you are using data in your organization? Data, you're using some type of data. While not an exhaustive list, this is to give you an example of some of the things that you can do in order to drive change intentionally. So, first thing that you should ask is, where are you? What is engagement like at your organization? Employee engagement is the leading factor that will give you insight on the sense of if a person is going to remain in your organization. If you take a step down memory lane, you will recall in 2019 on into 2020, we went through a global pandemic. And during that time, quiet quitting exploded. Anyone familiar with quiet quitting? Quiet quitting. Well, what was happening is that people were feeling that they did not belong and or that they were not connected with the organization. So you've got to pay attention to where are you and what is engagement like. Then, what are your strengths? How can you use these strengths to contribute to your organization? What are your opportunity areas? What will you seek to improve? If you are disconnected from what you're trying to actually accomplish, you are missing a vital part of your business's bottom line. Then, what are the key differences between specific groups within your organization? Are you paying attention to geographical location? Are you paying attention to different cultural factors within the organization? Are you paying attention to tenure within the organization, new members of the organization? Their voices are just as important. But if we're missing that, we're missing a vital opportunity. Then, what are the employees telling us? We must listen to the voices of the employees. As a professor at the University of Southern California, one of the things that when I teach research is I always talk about we can have all the quantitative data in the world, but you must accompany that with qualitative data as well, because the quantitative data will not tell you the specifics of the voices of your team members. You've got to understand what's happening so that if we know something is strategically significant, what does that mean? Statistically significant, what does that mean? Well, the voices of your team members will tell you that. Then, which managers in your organization are your stars? What are they doing that's working? What are our opportunities to grow? We can pay attention to the people within our organizations to be able to duplicate and drive that same type of change. And then what's next? Once again, with a priority-based implementation model, we're not just saying we're going to do something and never following up with it. We're going to be intentional about how to do this. Once again, my recommendation is month over month, quarter over quarter, and year over year, built in directly into the strategic plan or whatever you're using as a benchmark to measure change within your organization. So, what I'd like to do is recommend and activate all of your thinking to let's have a ACT conversation. We must acknowledge, we must collaborate, and we must take one step forward. That's the way that we drive change. So, as a certified diversity executive, I have learned over time that many people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, but they don't really know what they're talking about. And let me help you demystify that understanding. If you are only looking at factors that are what we can physically see about a person, you are missing a vital part of understanding the people within your organization as well as the bottom line of your organization. So very quickly, some of the things that I want to make sure that you understand when we're talking about diversity is what makes us unique, or a broad scope of perspectives, which means that it could be anything at all. When we're talking about equity, it's what are we using to dismantle systems of oppression within the organization. When we think about inclusion, it's how are we treated? What are we doing that makes a person feel included? Or another way of saying that, what voices are missing when we're working together? And most importantly is belonging. How connected do I feel to my organization? And if I don't feel a sense of connectedness, more likely than not, eventually I am going to disconnect, which means that my bottom line as a business is going to potentially suffer as a result. Another way of saying that is how do we make money, save money, and optimize our position in the market? That is compromise when people don't feel a sense of belonging. So, I'm going to share with you very quickly some information from an organization that I have the honor of working with. I'm going to keep that organization's name anonymous for confidentiality purposes, but I'm going to share with you a landscape of what they talked about with their global DE&I efforts, which impacted the team members within that organization. Their objective was to bring out the best in their global team members, creating a sense of belonging, being a place where they could grow, and ensuring everyone felt valued, respected, supported, and heard, and most importantly, challenged. They wanted to push the boundaries of what their team members could do. But how can you do that when you do not feel valued, respected, and supported? So that becomes a problem. So I'm going to skip this just in the interest of time. So here's some things to consider that came from the members of the organization. People in the organization would recommend the company as a great place to work. However, they lacked a sense of belonging, which means, as I just shared with you, more likely than not, over time, they were going to leave. They reported being treated with respect and dignity and that their workplace is free from harassment, but they did not feel that they could be their authentic selves. And it's only but so long if we can't show up and be who we are, people are going to start to disconnect. And then we found out that people felt cared about as a person, with most people understanding the various reporting processes that existed within the organization. However, and this is really important, everyone, They did not feel that the executive leadership held themselves accountable for DE&I results. And one of the leading factors that I must share with you, if you do not have buy-in from your executive leadership team, it is more likely that your DE&I efforts will be surface level action items that lead nowhere. So we've got to change the paradigm of what we're talking about, which means we've got to listen to the people that work in the organization. So really quickly, I'm going to show you some data, and then I'm going to move through this part quickly because it's not going to make as much sense because I want to move through so I can be on time. Couple of things to note. 2 items were above benchmark with the assessment that we developed. However, 11 were below benchmark. Those 11 items that were below benchmark become areas that we want to prioritize in the priority-based implementation model that I've referenced. You see that 63% of the organization was favorable. Some people would say, oh, that's pretty good. What I'm going to recommend is that we double down on those individuals that either were neutral and or that fell below benchmark, because that then becomes an opportunity for intentional growth. And obviously the numbers will look very different depending on your organization, but the objective is to make sure that we don't get sidetracked by numbers that seem promising, that we pay attention to what's happening within these percentages that are not responding and or that are falling below benchmark. This is just to give you an example of what the top drivers were and our things that we're doing well. We do want to report areas that we're doing well, but we also want to pay attention to what are our opportunities for growth. Top drivers in this organization, or opportunities rather, were the ability to be authentic, equal opportunity, and inclusion, all being factors that were problematic, and or all opportunities that the team members globally were reporting. But we had to dig deeper to see, well, what was happening with the respective individuals so that we would know what's happening, where's this coming from. So I'll share that with you. Overwhelmingly, because this is a global company, we found that individuals in Asia overwhelmingly reported every item below benchmark. And then we see some individuals in the UK and Europe, and then the United States were doing okay. Some people would say, okay, well, this is good. This is a problem, everyone. The reason it's a problem is that this tells me something's happening with your global team. And what I can share with you is that in my research, I found that they did not feel that their voices were being heard. In fact, many of the team members in our Asian divisions felt that they were just a number, that they did not matter, that they were excluded from the company culture, which meant that they were going to, more likely than not, disconnect at some point. So we had to change that paradigm. We wanted to dig in deeper to find out how do we make sure that they feel connected to what the company is doing at large. So here's where you start to say, well, if belonging is what we're trying to drive, how do we make sure that we're moving things forward? So what I did is I assessed the data that I had present, and then I looked at what would be necessary in order to move these items along. So ideally, in theory, what you would think about is that how do we make sure that we go above benchmark so that we're not below benchmark? So these were the areas that all became areas to prioritize, once again, because I focused on a priority-based implementation model. This meant that these areas that you see on your screen is what was built into the strategic plan. It is also what became the priority for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then year 5. And so what we're doing in that time is assessing, is this working? What are our continued opportunities to grow? Where do we need to continue to double down? Where do we need to make changes? This is why, once again, quarterly, you should be assessing. If your organization is only assessing data every 5 years, which is very common in many organizations, then you have an opportunity for growth. Consistent data and assessment and listening to the voices of your team members is critical so that you understand the voice of the employee to drive change. The more connected people feel, the more likely they're going to be energetic about their job. The more energetic they are about their job, the more likely you are able to make money, save money, and optimize your position in the market. These are some things, just to give you an idea. I'd recommend maybe you take a picture because I won't read all of them because the writing is small, but I'll share with you. These are some things that came up from the qualitative analysis that became important to pay attention to what people were saying within the organization. It helped me to understand the sense of what needed to change and where we needed to continue to double down. And so when I would meet with members across each of the regions, these were the things that I was leaning into to find out, are we moving the needle? Do we still have opportunities for growth? What is it that we're still needing to move, or where are we doing well now? But you got to pay attention to what people are saying. This is why the voice of the team member is vital. So, collaborate. Here's what we ended up doing. I said, let's bring together leaders, let's bring together regions, let's bring together individuals within this organization so we can collectively drive change. So what we did, once again, you hear me say this over and over, priority-based implementation model. We looked at key business goals and/or drivers to drive change. And then we built that into, as I stated, quarter over quarter, year over year. And then build that into a 5-year strategic plan. Then we looked at what are the results saying, what do we need to continue to do, what are our enablers, what are our opportunities or barriers that continue to exist. Then we said what are the unique areas that pertain to DE&I as a team, as a manager, because inclusion was a problem. And if people don't feel included, then belonging becomes compromised, which then means DEI is compromised. So, some things that I would recommend to each of you when you're thinking about how to make sure we're moving this and understanding the voice of the team members. Look at the organization at large. Your enterprise or your global company will have an impact at large. Then look at the individual team. Then look at the individual. These are some of the things that you may want to consider at each of these respective levels. But what's important overwhelmingly is that you understand the scope of the bottom line of the organization. That can and will have an impact at the team level as well as with your individual employees. And what we do not want to do is continue to see quiet quitting and or people feeling a sense of disconnect. Because if that is happening, more likely than not, they will eventually leave the organization and or you will be negatively impacted. So, some things that I would recommend for you to think about as you continue to carry your work forward in your respective organizations is when you leave this session, but not only the session, this Congress, this week I will, in 1 month I will, in the next quarter I will, because that's what it takes to take one step forward. That is also the way that we activate change. It does you no good if you come here and you learn all these great things, but you do nothing with it. And that's one of the things that I want to directly challenge each of you on in order so you can make sure your respective organizations drive change. So I know that was very quick. What I would recommend, I have a QR code on here. I welcome the opportunity to connect with you on LinkedIn. I can go into much greater detail with you about this work. But once again, you must listen to the voice of your team members as that can and will impact change. I thank you so much for allowing me to spend this time with you on this afternoon. I can answer maybe one question and then I'll get out of the way, but thank you so much for having me with this time with you. Any questions that I can answer? Thank you.